She lived in silence, hiding from mirrors and from people, until a stranger handed her a mirror and something far more powerful. What changed in that moment will stay with you long after the story ends. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The mountain air felt crisp against Eleanor Hayes' skin as she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The small cabin nestled in the Colorado wilderness had been her sanctuary for nearly 2 years now, ever since the fire that claimed her husband's life and left half her face scarred beyond recognition. She had retreated from the world, finding solace in the isolation these mountains provided. Eleanor moved carefully around her modest kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast of cornbread and coffee. The routine was comforting, one of the few things that remained unchanged in her shattered life. As she ate, she gazed out the window at the towering pines. The nearest town, Pinewood Creek, was a half-day's ride away, which suited her just fine. The fewer people who saw her, the better. After breakfast, Eleanor gathered her basket and knife. The forest provided most of what she needed: berries, mushrooms, and herbs that she dried and stored for the winter months. Her late husband, Thomas, had taught her how to recognize edible plants and track game. Those skills had kept her alive since his death. As she ventured into the woods, Eleanor's hand instinctively reached for the scarf draped across the right side of her face. The burns had healed as much as they ever would, leaving angry red ridges and taut, shiny skin. She had removed all mirrors from her cabin months ago, unable to face the stranger who looked back at her. "You're becoming a regular hermit, Ellie," she muttered to herself, using the nickname Thomas had given her. Sometimes speaking aloud was the only thing that kept the silence from becoming too oppressive. The snap of a twig caught her attention. Eleanor froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Bears were common in these parts, and though they usually avoided humans, a mother with cubs could be dangerous. Instead of a bear, a tall man emerged from between the trees. His broad shoulders and muscular arms spoke of a life of physical labor, and the axe strapped to his back marked him as a lumberjack. His beard was full but neatly trimmed, and kind eyes peered out from beneath a worn leather hat. Eleanor's instinct was to flee, but she found herself rooted to the spot. It had been months since she'd spoken to another person. "Beg your pardon, ma'am," the man said, tipping his hat. "Didn't mean to startle you." Eleanor turned her scarred side away from him, adjusting her scarf to ensure it covered the worst of the damage. "What are you doing on my property?" she demanded, her voice raspy from disuse. The man held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Name's Samuel Jackson. I'm with the timber company that bought the land west of here." "Must have strayed across the property line." He paused, studying her with concern. "Are you all right out here all alone?" "I'm fine," Eleanor replied curtly. "The boundary is marked by the creek. Please respect it." Samuel nodded slowly. "Of course, my apologies." He hesitated, then added, "If you need any help with anything chopping wood, repairs to your cabin, the logging camp is just beyond that ridge." He pointed westward. Eleanor felt an unexpected pang of longing for human connection, but she quickly suppressed it. "I don't need help. Good day, Mr. Jackson." She turned and hurried back toward her cabin, feeling his eyes on her back. Only when she was safely inside did she allow herself to breathe normally again. The encounter had shaken her more than she cared to admit. For months, she had convinced herself that solitude was preferable to the pity and revulsion her appearance would provoke. Now the brief conversation had awakened something she thought long dead, a desire for companionship. That night, as wind howled through the pines and rain pattered against her roof, Eleanor dreamed of Thomas. In her dream, he smiled at her, his warm hands cupping her face, her whole, unscarred face. "You're still living, Ellie," he said, "but you've stopped being alive." She woke with tears streaming down her cheeks, the phantom touch of his hands lingering on her skin. The rain had stopped, and moonlight filtered through her window, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. In that moment of clarity, Eleanor wondered if Thomas had been right. Had she merely been existing, not living? The thought followed her through the next day as she tended her small garden, preserved the last of summer's berries, and mended a tear in her dress. When had simple survival become enough? Before the fire, she and Thomas had dreamed of children, of building a larger house, of creating a life filled with love and purpose. As dusk approached, Eleanor made a decision. Tomorrow she would walk to the logging camp and ask if they needed someone to cook or mend clothes. It wasn't much, but it was a step toward rejoining the world. Thomas would have wanted that for her. With determination hardening into resolve, Eleanor began sorting through her meager possessions, looking for anything she could offer in trade. The world outside might be frightening, but the prospect of spending the rest of her life alone in this cabin had suddenly become even more terrifying. The logging camp bustled with activity as Eleanor approached the following morning. Men shouted to one another over the rhythmic sound of axes striking wood and saws biting through timber. The smell of sweat, pine sap, and wood smoke hung heavy in the air. Eleanor had dressed with care, choosing her least worn dress and arranging her scarf to hide as much of her scarring as possible. Her heart pounded so violently she feared it might burst from her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to retreat to the safety of her isolation. "You can do this, Ellie," she whispered to herself, channeling Thomas's encouraging voice. She clutched her basket of fresh baked bread and preserved fruits, a peace offering and proof of her skills. As she hesitated at the edge of the clearing, a familiar figure spotted her. Samuel Jackson set down his axe and approached, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Mrs. ." He began, then realized he didn't know her surname. "Hayes," she supplied. "Eleanor Hayes." Samuel nodded. "Mrs. Hayes, didn't expect to see you here." His tone held no judgment, only curiosity. Eleanor squared her shoulders. "I've come to speak with whoever's in charge. I thought perhaps you might need someone to cook or mend clothes." The words tumbled out in a rush before her courage could fail her. Samuel's expression softened. "That would be Mr. Thornton. He's in the main cabin." He gestured toward a structure larger than the others. "I can take you to him, if you'd like." Eleanor nodded gratefully, and they walked side by side through the camp. She felt the stares of the lumberjacks boring into her, their curiosity palpable. Some looked away quickly when they noticed her scarf, and she fought the urge to flee. Mr. Thornton proved to be a gruff but fair-minded man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and calloused hands that spoke of decades of hard work. He listened to Eleanor's proposition with undisguised interest. "Truth be told, Mrs. Hayes, we could use someone with your skills," he said after sampling her bread. "The men are tired of their own cooking, and there's always mending to be done. We can offer fair pay, nothing extravagant, mind you, but enough." They agreed that Eleanor would come 3 times a week to cook and collect mending. It was a simple arrangement, but as she walked back to her cabin later that day, she felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. Purpose, connection, the beginnings of a life beyond mere survival. Over the following weeks, Eleanor settled into a new routine. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, she rose before dawn to make the trek to the logging camp, where she prepared hearty meals for the hungry men and collected torn shirts, pants, and socks to mend at home. The other days, she tended her garden and worked on the mending, finding unexpected peace in the rhythm of her needle. The lumberjacks, initially awkward around her, gradually grew accustomed to her presence. They were respectful, if sometimes overly careful not to stare at her scarf-covered face. Eleanor appreciated their tact, but found herself wishing for the easy camaraderie she observed among them. Samuel Jackson was different. He made a point of thanking her for each meal, often lingering to help clean up afterward. His conversation was never forced, his manner never pitying. He spoke to her as a person, not a tragedy. "These mountains change with the seasons," he remarked one evening. As they stood outside the kitchen cabin, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. But they're always beautiful, aren't they? Eleanor nodded, breathing in the pine-scented air. Thomas, my husband, used to say that God showed off when he made these mountains. It was the first time she had mentioned Thomas to anyone since the fire. The words slipped out naturally, and she found herself smiling at the memory instead of cringing from the pain. It usually brought. Samuel seemed to understand the significance of the moment. Sounds like a wise man, he said softly. He was, Eleanor replied. He died in the fire that. She gestured vaguely toward her face. Samuel's eyes held compassion without pity. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Hayes. Eleanor, she corrected him, surprising herself. You can call me Eleanor. As autumn painted the forest in vibrant hues of gold and crimson, Eleanor found herself looking forward to her days at the camp, especially the quiet conversations with Samuel. He told her about his family back in Pennsylvania, his hopes of saving enough to buy land of his own someday, and his love of carving wood in his spare time. It helps me remember that these trees can be more than just timber, he explained, showing her a delicate bird he'd carved from pine. They can become something beautiful. The simple statement resonated with Eleanor in ways she couldn't articulate. Could broken things, broken people, become something beautiful too? One chilly October morning, as she kneaded dough for the day's bread, Eleanor heard a commotion outside. Wiping her hands on her apron, she stepped onto the porch to see a group of men carrying a stretcher toward the infirmary cabin. Blood stained the rough blanket covering the injured man. Timber fell wrong, someone explained grimly as they passed. Caught Johnson on the shoulder. Eleanor returned to her work, but her mind kept drifting to the injured lumberjack. After finishing the bread, she prepared a pot of broth and took it to the infirmary. Inside, she found the camp's doctor, an older man named Peterson, who had once practiced in Denver tending to Johnson's injury. The lumberjack's face was pale from pain and blood loss, but he managed a weak smile when he saw Eleanor. Thought I might miss your apple pie today, he joked through gritted teeth. Eleanor set down the broth. I saved you a piece, she promised. Then turned to Dr. Peterson. Is there anything I can do to help? The doctor looked at her appraisingly. Actually, yes. I could use an extra pair of hands while I stitch this up. To her own surprise, Eleanor didn't hesitate. She rolled up her sleeves and followed the doctor's instructions, holding bandages and instruments, applying pressure when needed. The work was intense and focused, leaving no room for self-consciousness. For those hours, she forgot about her scars, thinking only of easing Johnson's pain. It was nearly dusk when they finished. Johnson slept fitfully, his shoulder heavily bandaged, but the bleeding finally stopped. You've got steady hands, Dr. Peterson remarked as they cleaned up. And a strong stomach. Not everyone can handle seeing that much blood. Eleanor nodded, accepting the compliment. My father was a doctor. I used to help him sometimes. The doctor studied her thoughtfully. I could use an assistant, you know. Someone with your calm demeanor would be an asset. The offer took her by surprise, but as she walked home in the gathering darkness, Eleanor found herself considering it seriously. Helping Johnson had awakened something in her, a sense of purpose stronger than anything she'd felt since losing Thomas. Maybe this was the next step in finding her way back to living, not just surviving. That night, as wind whispered through the trees surrounding her cabin, Eleanor made her decision. Tomorrow she would accept Dr. Peterson's offer. The thought both terrified and exhilarated her, much like life itself. Winter descended on the Colorado mountains with unforgiving swiftness. Heavy snow blanketed the forest, transforming the logging camp into a collection of smoke-breathing cabins huddled against the cold. The work continued despite the weather. Timber was in high demand, and the men pushed through the bitter conditions with grim determination. For Eleanor, the snow meant a more difficult journey from her cabin to the camp, but she never missed a day. Her role had expanded beyond cooking and mending. She now spent most afternoons assisting Dr. Peterson in the infirmary. The winter months brought frostbite, injuries from slipping on ice, and the inevitable coughs and fevers that spread through the close quarters of the camp. "You've got a natural talent for this," Dr. Peterson told her one evening as they wrapped a young lumberjack's sprained wrist. "You should consider formal training when spring comes." Eleanor smiled politely but made no promises. The future still seemed like a foreign country one she wasn't sure she was ready to visit. For now, it was enough to focus on each day as it came, finding satisfaction in the work of her hands, and the knowledge that she was helping others. Samuel had been appointed foreman of his crew, a position that kept him busier than ever, but he still found time to stop by the infirmary or kitchen when Eleanor was there. Their friendship had deepened over the winter months, built on small kindnesses and shared moments of quiet conversation. One particularly brutal February day, a blizzard howled down from the mountains, forcing the men to abandon their work and seek shelter in the camp. Eleanor had arrived before the storm hit and now found herself unable to return home. "You can take my bunk," Samuel offered when Mr. Thornton announced that no one should attempt to leave until the blizzard passed. "I'll sleep by the fire in the main cabin," Eleanor protested, but Samuel was insistent. "I've weathered worse conditions than a night on the floor," he assured her with a gentle smile. His cabin was small but meticulously neat. A shelf held several books, unexpected treasures in a logging camp, and beautifully carved wooden figures lined the windowsill. Eleanor recognized birds, deer, and other forest creatures, all rendered with remarkable detail and care. "These are wonderful," she said, running her finger along the smooth curve of a hawk's wing. Samuel ducked his head almost shyly, just a way to pass the evenings. Before leaving her to rest, he hesitated at the door. "Eleanor," he said, using her first name with careful respect, "I've been meaning to give you something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden object, pressing it into her palm. It was a hand mirror, carved from pale birch wood. The handle was adorned with intricate patterns of leaves and flowers, polished to a warm glow. Eleanor stared at it, her throat suddenly tight. "I noticed you don't have a mirror," Samuel explained gently. I thought you might like to see yourself as others see you." Eleanor's fingers closed around the mirror, but she couldn't bring herself to look into its reflective surface. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate for the tumult of emotions his gift had stirred. Samuel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Good night, Eleanor. Sleep well." After he left, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bunk, the mirror heavy in her hand. For nearly 3 years, she had avoided her reflection, unable to face the reality of her scarred face. The memory of how she once looked, the smooth skin, the easy smile, was too painful to reconcile with what the fire had left her. "Coward," she murmured to herself. With trembling fingers, she slowly raised the mirror. The face that looked back at her was both familiar and strange. The left side was as she remembered, the same blue eyes, the same curve of cheek and jaw. The right side bore the marks of the fire-rippled skin, red in places, unnaturally tight. Her right eyebrow was mostly gone, and her hairline was uneven, where the flames had reached it. Yet something else caught her attention. The face in the mirror wasn't monstrous or grotesque, as her fears had painted it. It was simply hers, a face that had survived. A face that had begun to live again. Tears welled in her eyes and spilled down both the smooth and scarred cheeks. For the first time since the fire, Eleanor truly mourned, not just for Thomas and the life they'd lost, but for the woman she had been and the long, lonely journey she had traveled since. When she finally lay down to sleep, exhausted from emotion, the mirror rested on the small table beside the bunk. She had looked, and she had survived that too. The blizzard raged for 2 days, during which Eleanor continued her duties in the camp. She cooked hearty stews to ward off the cold, treated a case of frostbitten fingers, and darned countless socks. By lamplight, the enforced closeness created a sense of camaraderie among everyone trapped by the storm. On the evening of the second day, Mr. Thornton organized an impromptu gathering in the main cabin. Someone produced a fiddle, another a harmonica, and soon music filled the space. Men took turns telling stories and jokes, their laughter a defiant response to the howling wind outside. Eleanor sat slightly apart, content to observe until Samuel appeared at her side, offering a cup of coffee. "Quite a party," he remarked. Settling beside her, she nodded, watching as two men attempted a clumsy jig to the fiddle's lively tune. "It's nice to see such joy in the middle of a storm. That's what life is, isn't it?" Samuel said thoughtfully. "Finding joy despite the storms." Their conversation was interrupted when Johnson, now recovered from his shoulder injury, called for Samuel to share one of his stories. With an apologetic smile to Eleanor, Samuel stood and moved to the center of the room. His tale, about an encounter with a particularly clever fox during his first hunting trip, was animated and humorous. Eleanor found herself laughing along with the others, drawn into the warmth of the moment. When Samuel finished to approving applause, several men turned expectantly toward her. "What about you, Mrs. Hayes?" Johnson called. "Surely you've got a story to share." Eleanor felt a moment of panic at being the center of attention, but then she remembered Thomas's love of storytelling. For his sake, and perhaps for her own, she straightened her shoulders and began to speak. "My husband was a terrible cook," she started, smiling at the memory. "Once, he decided to surprise me with breakfast. The story of Thomas's disastrous attempt at pancakes, which ended with batter on the ceiling, and a small fire in the pan, drew genuine laughter. As Eleanor spoke, she realized she was remembering the joy rather than the loss, celebrating Thomas's life rather than merely mourning his death. When the storm finally passed, leaving a pristine white landscape in its wake, Eleanor returned to her cabin with Samuel's mirror carefully wrapped in her shawl. She placed it on her dresser, not hiding it away but not quite ready to make looking at her reflection a daily habit either. That night, she wrote in her journal for the first time in months, "I looked at my face today, really looked. The scars are part of me now, like the rings in a tree that show where fire once burned through the forest. They mark a terrible passage, but they are not the whole story. There was life before, and there is life after. I'm beginning to believe that again." Spring's first tentative warmth was just beginning to melt the snowdrifts when Dr. Peterson received a letter that would change everything. A hospital was being established in Denver, and they were seeking experienced doctors and nurses. Peterson, whose arthritis had worsened over the winter, saw it as an opportunity to return to city practice with less physical strain. "They need trained assistants," he told Eleanor as they organized the infirmary supplies. "I've taken the liberty of recommending you. With a few months of formal instruction, you could become a proper nurse." The offer was both exciting and terrifying. Denver meant opportunity, but it also meant leaving the sanctuary she had built for herself in these mountains. Leaving the logging camp. Leaving Samuel. That thought gave her pause. When had Samuel Jackson become so important to her? Their friendship had grown naturally over the months, built on mutual respect and genuine kindness. He had given her a mirror, and the courage to look into it. He had seen beyond her scars from the beginning. Was there something more than friendship in his steady gaze, in the way he sought her company? And what about her own feelings, which had slowly transformed from gratitude to something deeper and more complex? As spring advanced and her departure date approached, Eleanor found herself increasingly torn. The promise of a new beginning in Denver beckoned, but the thought of saying goodbye to Samuel left an unexpected ache in her heart. On her last evening at the camp, Samuel invited her to walk with him along the creek where they had first met nearly a year before. The water ran high with melted snow, and new growth burst from the forest floor, tender green shoots reaching for the sun. "I'm proud of you, Eleanor," Samuel said as they stood on the bank. "Taking this opportunity in Denver. You'll make a fine nurse." "Thank you," she replied, studying his profile against the setting sun. "I couldn't have done it without your friendship." Samuel turned to face her fully. "Is that what we have? Friendship?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken possibility. Eleanor felt her heart quicken. "I think we have something rare," she answered carefully. "Something I didn't expect to find again after Thomas." Samuel nodded slowly. "I've never met anyone like you, Eleanor Hayes. Your strength, your kindness, your courage, they humble me." He took a deep breath. "I don't want to say goodbye." Eleanor looked up at him, this man who had helped her find her way back to living. "Then don't," she whispered as the creek rushed beside them and the mountain stood witness. Samuel took her hand in his. No promises were made, no declarations exchanged. But something shifted between them, a recognition of feelings too profound for casual words. That night, Eleanor stood before Samuel's mirror and truly looked at herself. The woman who gazed back was scarred but whole, marked by tragedy but not defined by it. She was ready for whatever came next, whether in Denver or beyond, because she had remembered how to look forward instead of back. Tomorrow would bring change and challenge, but for the first time in years, Eleanor Hayes welcomed the future with an open heart. Denver in 1885 was a city in transformation. What had once been little more than a mining camp now boasted brick buildings, gas-lit streets, and the persistent bustle of commerce. For Eleanor, arriving after years in the mountain wilderness, the noise and crowds were overwhelming at first. Horse-drawn carriages clattered over cobblestones, vendors hawked their wares from street corners, and everywhere people hurried about their business with urban purposefulness. St. Mary's Hospital stood on a quiet street away from the main thoroughfare. Three-story brick building with large windows and a small garden. This would be Eleanor's home and workplace for the foreseeable future. Dr. Peterson had secured quarters for her in the nurses' dormitory and introduced her to the hospital's stern but fair matron, Mrs. Blackwood. "You come highly recommended," Mrs. Blackwood said, appraising Eleanor with sharp eyes that didn't flinch from her scarred face. "But make no mistake, we expect dedication and discipline from our nurses." "The training will be rigorous," Eleanor nodded. "I understand, ma'am. I'm ready to work hard." The next weeks proved Mrs. Blackwood's warning accurate. Eleanor's days began before dawn and ended well after sunset. She learned proper bandaging techniques, how to administer medicines, the importance of cleanliness in preventing infection, and dozens of other skills necessary for modern nursing. Her evenings were spent studying medical texts until her eyes burned with fatigue. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, Eleanor would think of the logging camp infirmary, of the satisfaction she had felt helping others through their pain. She would think of Samuel's quiet encouragement and find renewed determination. Samuel wrote regularly, his letters a lifeline connecting her to the mountains and the people she had left behind. He described the progress of the timber work, Johnson's engagement to a shopkeeper's daughter from Pinewood Creek, and his own continued carving projects. Between the lines, Eleanor read his loneliness and his hope. "The forest isn't the same without you," he wrote in one letter. "I find myself looking up from my work, expecting to see you walking toward the camp with your basket. Denver must be treating you well. Your last letter sounded happier than I've ever heard you." It was true. Despite the exhaustion and occasional frustration of learning so much so quickly, Eleanor had found unexpected joy in her new life. The hospital work fulfilled her in ways she hadn't anticipated, and she had even made friends among the other nurses in training. Charlotte Wilson, a widow from Kansas City, had the bed next to Eleanor's in the dormitory. Initially intimidated by Eleanor's scars, Charlotte had quickly discovered the gentle spirit behind them. Their late-night conversations, whispered so as not to wake the others, became a cherished ritual. "Why haven't you married that lumberjack of yours?" Charlotte asked one night as they darned stockings by candlelight. "The way you talk about him, it's clear you love him." Eleanor's hands stilled on her work. "It's complicated," she said softly. "After Thomas died, I never thought I'd want to marry again. And then there's this." She gestured toward her scarred face. "Samuel says it doesn't matter to him, but you're afraid it might someday," Charlotte finished for her, "or that others will judge him for choosing you." Eleanor nodded, grateful for her friend's understanding. And now we're separated by miles in circumstance. Perhaps it's better this way. Charlotte snorted softly. Nonsense. If there's one thing I've learned in my 40 years, it's that life is too short for perhaps and better this way. If you love him, Eleanor Hayes, don't let fear or pride stand in your way. The conversation lingered in Eleanor's mind as autumn turned the trees along Denver's streets to gold and crimson. Samuel's letters mentioned he might visit the city before winter made the mountain passes treacherous. The thought of seeing him again filled her with both anticipation and anxiety. Would he still look at her the same way? Had the months apart changed his feelings or hers? In late October, as Eleanor assisted with a difficult childbirth, she found unexpected clarity. The mother was young and frightened, facing a breech delivery that had already lasted too long. Eleanor stayed by her side for hours, wiping her brow, encouraging her to breathe, holding her hand through contractions that seemed endless. I can't do this, the woman sobbed as another pain racked her body. I'm not strong enough. Eleanor leaned close. Yes, you are, she said firmly. You have everything you need within you. One more push for your child, for yourself. With a final tremendous effort, the young mother brought her daughter into the world. When Eleanor placed the squalling infant in her arms, the woman's exhausted face transformed with a love so powerful it seemed to illuminate the room. Thank you, she whispered to Eleanor. Thank you for believing I could. Walking back to the dormitory in the pre-dawn stillness, Eleanor suddenly understood what she had been missing. In helping the young mother find her strength, she had recognized her own. The fire had taken much from her husband, her home, her former face, but it had not taken her capacity to love or be loved. That remained, as resilient as the new growth after a forest fire. Samuel deserved to know that. She deserved to tell him. 3 days later, as Eleanor finished her morning rounds, Mrs. Blackwood appeared at her side. You have a visitor, the matron announced with uncharacteristic gentleness. I've told him he can wait in the garden. Eleanor's heart leaped into her throat. She knew, without being told, who waited among the late autumn flowers. Samuel stood by the small fountain, his tall frame looking somehow out of place in the manicured setting. He had traded his work clothes for a clean shirt and jacket, and his beard was neatly trimmed, but his hands strong, capable hands that could fell trees and carve delicate wooden birds, fidgeted nervously with his hat. When he saw her, his face lit with a smile that erased all Eleanor's doubts. Eleanor, he said, stepping forward. You look. He seemed to search for the right word. Radiant, she laughed softly. I've been on my feet since 4 this morning, Samuel. I doubt radiant is the correct term. He shook his head, still smiling. I stand by it. This life suits you. They sat on a bench beneath a maple tree, shedding its golden leaves. Samuel told her about his journey to Denver, the changes in the logging camp, the news from Pinewood Creek. Eleanor shared stories from the hospital, her training progress, her friendship with Charlotte. It was easy, this conversation, as natural as breathing. Yet beneath the comfortable exchange ran a current of tension, of words yet unspoken. Finally Samuel reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. I've been working on this for months, he said, placing it in her hands. Open it. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a carved wooden heart. Unlike his other carvings, this one was made from 2 different woods, a dark walnut and a pale birch joined so perfectly that they formed a single seamless heart. The dark wood is from my home forest in Pennsylvania, Samuel explained softly. The light is from the Colorado mountains where we met. 2 different pieces from 2 different places, made whole together. He took a deep breath. Like us, Eleanor, if you'll have me. Eleanor traced the smooth contours of the wooden heart, feeling the precise point where the 2 woods joined. It wasn't a perfect seam up close. You could see where the grain changed, where the colors differed. Yet together, they created something beautiful and strong. Samuel, she began, her voice thick with emotion. I'm not the same woman I was before the fire. The scars aren't just on my face, they're on my heart, my soul. I know, he said simply. I'm not asking for the woman you were. I'm asking for the woman you are, the one who found the courage to look in a mirror again, to start a new life, to help others heal, even while healing herself. He took her hands in his. I love you, Eleanor Hayes, scars and all. Eleanor looked into his eyes and saw her reflection. They're not as a damaged thing to be pitied, but as a woman worthy of love, of joy, of a future bright with possibility. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll have you, Samuel Jackson. The wooden heart lay between them, a symbol of what they had found and what they would build together, something whole, something beautiful, made from pieces that had journeyed far to find each other. That evening, Eleanor wrote in her journal, "Today I said yes to loving again, to building a life with a man who sees me truly. The fire took much, but it also forged me into someone stronger than I knew I could be. I am not defined by my scars, but by how I have learned to live with them openly, honestly, without shame. Samuel says we'll return to the mountains after my training is complete, build a home near Pinewood Creek where I can serve as the town's nurse, and he can establish his own timber business. A new beginning, rooted in the place where I first began to heal. Thomas will always be part of me, part of my story. But my story continues with new chapters waiting to be written." When Samuel placed his carved heart in my hands today, I felt Thomas smile. "That's living, Ellie," he would have said. "That's really living." As winter descended once more on Colorado, Eleanor faced the future with an open heart and the certainty that some fires, while devastating, clear the way for new growth. Her scarred face was no longer something to hide, but a map of the journey that had brought her here to this moment, this love, this life reclaimed from ashes. And when she looked in the mirror each morning, Eleanor Hayes saw not what she had lost, but all that she had found along the way.